The story of Joshua Elishev could be your story. It could be your son's story. A story of a smart kid, perhaps too smart for his own good. After a near perfect SAT score, Joshua was educated in prison, not the Naval Academy. The author of the gripping new book, Privilege Lost, gives an oral account of his life before, during, and after his 5 years in prison in this 12-part podcast series, Losing Privilege. Losing Privilege, episode 8. Joshua, you promised me that this is going to be a little bit lighter, fair, actually fun. So let's just jump right into it. Okay. Trying to decide, do we want to start with music or do we want to start with Dungeons and Dragons?
Well, you got to start with the D&D.
I want to start with the D&D because we've already briefly touched on music. So you're in prison, you're on the back half of the sentence, and I've heard about playing cards in prison, playing 25, 35-year-old board games, but D&D.
Okay, so this actually goes a little bit earlier than the back half.
Okay.
Although it was through the entire second half. So I want to say at about 2 years, a little over 2 years, a little less than 2.5 years, I was still at ACI, Appalachia Correctional. It is a really dark place. That's where the murders happen. That's where the rapes happen. That's really dark place. And one of the things that I had found that I wouldn't let my parents send me any money for canteen. They didn't do anything to be in prison. They shouldn't have had to support me, right? So they had offered once or twice, and I wouldn't let them send me any money. That meant, though, that I had to find a way to get what I needed. I had to create my own hustle. I am phenomenal on strategy and logic and anything that puts strategy and logic together. I'm right up my alley.
Well, it's the intellectual in you.
So you're thinking we're still talking about D&D. We're not. We're talking about chess.
No. I had a feeling there was a build-up.
There is. So we're talking about chess.
I was thinking it was either Strategio or chess.
So this is to chess. So one of the few things that is readily available in jails and prisons are generally chessboards. It's a great way to pass the time, keep your mind busy, and it's usually the people that you least expect that are like grand master level. It's usually the little old black men that are these phenomenal chess players, and they will totally pretend like they don't know how to play right up until you gamble. And then they wipe the floor with you like you're a little kid. You are so out of your
going into the pool halls.
It's exactly. They're just like the pool sharks, but they were chess sharks. And I'm talking about guys that are like 90 years old, little old black guys, no teeth. You think they would be playing checkers or something. No, these guys are great. And so I found that I was really good at chess. I'm also a pool shark, so I was really good at pretending I wasn't good at chess right up until people would gamble with me. And so my hustle started where I would gamble on chess and I would make money because I would lose one or two and then double it and then clean the table. And so there was a group of guys, which they were very stereotypical. They were the nerdy, college-educated white guys that sat at the table every Saturday, and they had dice, and whatever they were doing, it was really weird, right? I had never seen Dungeons and Dragons. I had only heard about it, maybe passing on a Simpsons episode or something. So I didn't know what they were doing. And I walked up and I just stood there and I watched a couple of times. And when I say stereotypical, I mean, two of them were child molesters, which are normally college educated white guys. You know, the people that were there playing Dungeons and Dragons were the more intellectual type. You have to be able to read in order to be able to play, which already sets you above 40% of the inmate population. But I would pick on them. First of all, half of them were child molesters, so picking on them was expected. And the ones that weren't, I mean, you get beat up all the time. Shit rolls downhill. I'm not proud of the fact that I then found somebody who was in a lower spot than me and picked on them for doing something that was helping them pass their time. So I'm not proud of that. But what I can say was I would walk up to them and I would say, hey, what are you guys doing? Oh, we're playing Dungeons and Dragons. It's so much fun. Do you want to join us? And I was like, not really. I like fun stuff too, like women and sports. And and they would be like, we like women.
Not the geeky, nerdy stuff.
Yeah, they would be like, oh, we like women too. And I say, yeah, but I prefer women who are over the age of 18. And it's like I would, I was not nice. I was good-naturedly picking on them, but they were definitely barbed shots. And one of the guys who was there, incredibly well-spoken, he had like a master's degree in journalism and theater, and really smart. And he also was a chess player, but I didn't know he was a chess player. I had never seen him play chess. He had seen me play chess, and he said, you know what, Josh? I want to make a bet with you. I want to bet you that I can beat you on the chessboard. We're going to play 5 games. I bet you I can beat you at least once. And if I beat you at least once, you have to come play one day with us. If you beat me in all 5, all of us will sit here and take whatever jabs you want to throw at us with no more complaints. I can't lose. I haven't lost yet. I took his bet. The first 2 games was a wash, but he pool sharked me. He pool sharked me because the last 3 games, he made me work for it. I won the first 4. First 2 were easy. Second 2, I worked for it. The third one, the very last time he made me work for it. So game number 5, I didn't win. I didn't lose. He got me with a stalemate, right? A draw. Now, as far as I was concerned, a draw means I didn't win. As far as he was concerned, a draw meant he didn't win. And the bet was, from his perspective, he would win 1. The bet from my perspective was I wouldn't lose, right? So he said, it's a stalemate. I didn't win any of them. You don't have to play with us. You can pick on us. And I said, no, I didn't win all 5. I don't care that you didn't win. I didn't win all 5. I will be there on Saturday because I'm a man of my word. So I participated begrudgingly. I joined and I played. And at the end of that day, we played for, I don't know, like 8 hours. We only stopped for count times and for lunches. We played for like 8 or 9 hours till like 10 o'clock at night when they finally made us go to our beds. At the end of that, he was like, all right, Josh, you kept your word. You showed everybody that you are a man of your word. You don't have to play with us again, man. And I was like, what are you talking about? When do we play again? I had so much fun, right? We've been talking about all the dark stuff and how horrible everything was. But there were moments where things weren't all bad. With everything else that was going on, there was still positive moments. There was still positive connections. And what I had found that first time I played Dungeons and Dragons, the guy that was the dungeon master that was narrating the story, he took me completely out of prison. I was not there for 10 hours. I was not in prison.
When you were telling that story, what I got a sense of was that you found some type of normalcy in a environment in which there is nothing normal.
Absolutely. I found a group, And, you know, I even was able to put aside the fact that 2 of the guys who were there for sex offenses on minors. I completely forgot about that, which is a huge deal when you're in prison, right? I completely forgot about that. I forgot where I was. Everything else disappeared. The guy who was narrating, he was an Army veteran. He had been in the Second Gulf War. He was in Iraq. Skinny guy, kind of a long face, kind of like a young William Dafoe. Except that when we were sitting there, we were all wearing the same blue uniform. We're exactly the same in every way. But as we were playing the game, he was describing a young, dark-haired woman, sort of autistic, having a mental breakdown. I didn't see an Army veteran, a prisoner, or even a guy. He was so good at weaving a story that I literally saw in front of me this young woman having a mental breakdown, playing with a doll. And then 20 minutes later, he would be describing something that a different character would do. And instead of seeing a man here, I saw a dwarf or a gnome. The whole prison disappeared. And all I saw was what he was using his words to describe. He was a phenomenal orator, and which, not surprising, because the people who participate in those are usually more educated, more well-read. They've done creative reading and writing. He was amazing. In fact, now we're nearly 10 years later. I still play Dungeons and Dragons. I host a game here, and I have played with many other people, some college professors, some professional gamers, and he is still the standard by which I judge a game and a narrator. He was so good at it, and that I have tried to model how I play after how he played. So it was so much fun. They really said, hey, you did what you had to do. You don't have to come back. And I was like, no, I'm going to be here tomorrow. And they were like, you don't have to. Yeah, I want to play tomorrow. What time do we start?
Was it one of the first, when you played that first time, was it one of the first times, or maybe even the first time that since you had been in prison, that you found some type of place where you felt like you fit, or that you were safe?
Yes. So playing chess was a distraction and a way to make money, but it was not something that provided security or really an escape. Same thing with any job assignment, working out in the rec yard, football, none of that was ever really safe. None of that provided a connection, a stimulation. None of that was anything more than a distraction or an obligation. But this, I felt safe. I forgot that I was in prison. I felt like a normal person doing a normal thing with normal people, and no different than if you had a game night at your house with your wife and some of your neighbors, right? It is a normal thing for a group of adults to get together, to sit around a table, to talk, to enjoy each other's company for a few hours. And that's a normal, healthy thing. And that's what D&D was. It was amazing. I also painted a target on my back when I started playing D&D. One time I could have gotten away with because I lost a bet, honored my word. But when I went back, I knowingly put a target on my back, and I didn't care because I found an escape from prison.
Well, the game itself is based in fantasy.
Yes.
And here you were in a reality that was horrific, and you found an escape.
Yes. And the irony is the game is called Dungeons and Dragons.
And you were in a dungeon.
Lived in a dungeon surrounded by dragons. And so it was actually, there was irony there. It was not lost on me. But everything, like the whole point of doing a role-playing game is not to role-play your reality, right? It is to do something completely different so you could live vicariously. Even here at my own home, right? When we play, my wife, my players, myself, nobody plays themselves, right? We have a girl who is kind of heavy, not a lot of self-confidence. She's not the most attractive person, and her and her boyfriend would come. He was quintessential Simpsons comic book store guy, but the two of them, she always wanted to play a beautiful, charismatic princess, the person she would never be in real life, who she has never gotten to be. That's who she wanted to be. And he had the lisp, and he had gotten bullied. So he always wanted to play the knight in shining armor who could orate and win people over with his looks and his words. They play the people they've always wanted to be but will never be. They don't play themselves. Well, in prison, we didn't play a bunch of rough and tumble guys. We really wanted to get into something that took us as far away as possible. So like my first character I played a female. I wanted to get as far away from prison that I even chose to play a female character because it was as far removed from being surrounded by a bunch of guys as I could get. And I actually got a lot of flack and shit for that too, because if I'm playing a female character, I must have been gay, which paints a different kind of target on your back.
Sure, and I'm sure that saying, well, in Shakespearean times, all the women were played by men, I'm sure that reasoning did not go over too well.
No, because the average education level in prison is usually about 10th grade. And there's quite a few people who are illiterate, don't even know who Shakespeare is. So that wouldn't have flown in a culture that is so physical dominance oriented. Historically, when you look at the culture and slave trade, the plantations that America was built on, well, unfortunately, the prisons are an extension of the original slave trade. And the slave masters would beat and abuse and break the slaves. The white man in power would beat and abuse the slave man, whatever. It all rolled downhill. One of the ways that they used to create that division and to break their slaves was to treat them like dogs. And sadly, when you look at poor, uneducated communities of color, they typically are more abusive towards their dogs. They don't treat them in the same way, and it's completely normal for them. They treat the dogs the way the plantation owners treated the slaves, and the entire culture in prison is based off of physical dominance creating superiority in the hierarchy, or the louder you are, the more right you are. If you win a fight, it doesn't matter what the fight was about, the winner is right. History is always written by the victor, right? But that's the mentality. So the idea that you're gay or you're doing something that makes you possibly gay or more effeminate in that very black and white type of culture, being gay also means being a victim. So got to be careful with that. And I was, you know what? And I didn't care because that took me out of prison. D&D took me out of prison. It set me free for a few hours. It was for the first time in over 2 years that I had felt free despite of where I was. I did not feel like I was incarcerated. It was like 1,000 pounds had been lifted off of my shoulders for a few hours. I won't call it joy, but I had fun. I smiled. I laughed. If you can believe that, I laughed. Real laughter, not like, yeah, okay. No, it was real laughter, like sides hurting laughter that day. And
what did it feel like when you went back to your bunk and you laid down that very first night? What was your feelings?
Oh, I didn't want to let go of the game. So I tried to keep my head in the game that we were playing for as long as I could. I focused on nothing else until I was forced to, or that thought had run its course. That's kind of like when you wake up from a really good dream and you don't want to wake up from the dream, but you're up. So you focus on the dream to try to remember it as much as you can before it fades. It was like that. It was like laying down after it was over. It was like waking up from a dream that you didn't want to end. So I focused on that for as long as I could before I was back in prison. And the sad thing is, because of the different schedules and the way that the prison was organized, it was only Saturday and Sundays that they played. So then I had a whole week of looking forward to it, but also feeling, again, how much more sharply did I feel the negativity and where I was after having just been given a taste of freedom all over again, right? And that was the downside, is every single time I played D&D from that point forward, when I was done, it was the darkness of my situation, the hopelessness, everything was just that much more pronounced because I had just experienced that moment of freedom, of happiness, of laughter, which is, I guess, to be expected, because you go from literally being in a world of fairies and elves and gold and you can accomplish anything, to you're in a condemned old World War II airbase that's been condemned and that you're not even supposed to be in, but they lie to the public and say it's shut down. Yeah, the place that I was at they had been telling the public for years that it was shut down, that all of the inmates were across the street at the newer facility. It was condemned. They had asbestos and broken windows covered in plywood. It was pretty brutal. So D&D was awesome. Now, I ended up getting transferred, right? I was playing there for a couple of months, and then they transferred me. And I was heartbroken because I had found something positive. Well, lo and behold, when they transferred me, I walk into the dorm, the guy that my bunkmate, the moment I walk into the dorm, after I introduced myself, he immediately went into his locker, pulled out a D&D book, and then turned to the guy in the bunk next to him and was like, "You ready to play this afternoon?" I was like, whoa, I thought this was the end of the world. I just landed in the right spot. These guys play every day. Woo! I can do this. That was when I had my moment of, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I will make it through this. Because that was when I was like, I found a way to survive it. And I was there for like 6 months before they transferred me again. And I played D&D every day for 6 months. Except what happened is, at that facility, the books were banned. So they kept getting their books confiscated. Then somebody else would get them snuck in by a guard. Dice were prohibited contraband, but they would still make their own dice. They would use glue and sand and little pieces of paper, and they'd find a way to make homemade dice until they got confiscated. And they kept getting confiscated to the point where one of the guys and we ended up just having a 2-person D&D game where we just kind of both went back and forth as a storyteller. So it was a communal storytelling rather than one person narrating, which is really weird. But we would literally sit on my bunk all day, every day, having a D&D game. We did X-Men and superheroes, and we had multiple generations within the same game. It just went on and on and on. The only time that I wasn't there doing that with him was when I was forced to be out on the rec yard, where I founded an ultimate frisbee game and got everybody involved, including all of the people who only wanted to play football because anything else was for white people. So we started playing ultimate frisbee, but we used a football, and I got all of the football players in, and the guards would even come watch because they had never seen the Latins, the blacks, the whites have 30 on 30 playing a sport on the field when it wasn't a riot. And it was great. I got the whole compound involved. In fact, when they started having like wardens and people from out of state come, and they're like, this compound has never had a lack of violence for 3 months straight. Like, there hasn't been a single fight, that's because everybody except for when we were locked in the dorm, was playing ultimate frisbee, running all day. Everybody was too tired every day to get into violence and fights. So I actually found a way to make everybody's time easier, and it resulted in a noticeable decrease in violence. Now that says a lot. What that tells me is making it as miserable as possible is counterproductive. If you make it a little bit more humane, you're still going to have guys away from their family, away from society, serving their time. But instead of them trying to kill each other, they're just going to bide their time, maybe find a way to be better and go out and be better to society. Making punishment is one thing. Torture is another. And as soon as you take the torture out of punishment, the punishment can be effective without being violent. That was huge. It's also really interesting that one of the guys that I taught in the military was one of the guards at that prison. And so he let me do a lot of things and start a lot of things that may not have otherwise been allowed, but I had been teaching him as part of the military unit. So this facility that I got transferred to had a live band in their chapel.
You just got to the transition. Well done.
Yeah. So this one had a live band in the chapel, and the two of the guys that I played Dungeons and Dragons with and who loved the Ultimate Frisbee were on the praise and worship band in the chapel. And I had already found that Dungeons and Dragons had managed to pull me out of prison. Putting a guitar in my hand and letting me play music, to me, sounded like it was going to do exactly the same thing. Now you've got 1,200 people and you've got 5 openings to play on the praise and worship band. So what's the likelihood that I'm going to be the one that gets on the praise and worship band? I had to fight for it a little bit, but because I had befriended some of the guys that were there, they put in a word with the chaplain. I was able to get in there. I knew like 2.5 chords. I could strum. I did not know how to play guitar, but I had a good attitude and I could follow the lead of other people. You show me what you want, I can replicate it. And so I started getting into the chapel. So I was playing Dungeons and Dragons in the morning, out on the rec yard in the late morning, Ultimate Frisbee, and early afternoon, Ultimate Frisbee. Late afternoon, I was in the chapel with the guitar. And a couple of months after that, Trevor, the one who I lost the bet to and ended up having to play Dungeons and Dragons with, got transferred into the same dormitory on the same compound as me. He was a percussionist in college, traditionally trained percussionist, drums, the whole 9 yards. So he ended up on the praise and worship band too. So now we're playing music together every day and Dungeons and Dragons together every day. And time feels like, for the most part, it's starting to really roll, right? I was no longer looking at each day and saying, okay, I have 793 days left. It was, oh, wow, I haven't looked at my calendar in 3.5 weeks. I can go ahead and check all these off. I'm a month closer to going home. They just started rolling. And then I got transferred right about the 2.5 year mark. Right about the 2.5 year mark, I got transferred to Polk in the middle of the state of Florida. And I was devastated. Yeah, it was 7 hours closer to my family. That was where I was like, oh, maybe I start getting family that can come visit me. But at the same token, there's no more Dungeons and Dragons. There's no more band. There's no more Ultimate Frisbee. I really don't want to start over again. Well, I got there. They had an even better band program. Well funded from local churches, nice gear. Instead of like 2 or 3 days a week where they had services, they had 2 or 3 services a day, 6 days a week. You get live music in the chapel instead of one little rec yard. This compound had 2 rec yards. I got there and I was really, really worried. And then, nobody's playing Ultimate Frisbee. I couldn't get an Ultimate Frisbee game going. Nobody was interested. So that one died. Dungeons and Dragons, though, I was able to find some people that did Dungeons and Dragons. And I was in the bunk next to the assistant band leader who worked in the chapel, and he pulled some strings because for whatever reason, he liked my attitude, and I got to try out with the band. So I found a group here now playing Dungeons and Dragons, except instead of a wide open dorm, these are all 2-man room cells. So when you play Dungeons and Dragons now, you actually could sit in a room. Everybody could kind of spread out in a circle, no distractions. You were allowed to have dice here. You could have the books here. And there was a lot less officer harassment of the inmates in this setting. So like now, instead of playing a few hours a day or a few days a week, now we could sit for 6 hours at a time undisturbed. It was fairly comfortable. In fact, you could sit back. If it was my room, I could actually lay back on my bunk. I could be laying on my side. I could get a little comfortable while I was escaping prison playing D&D. And when I got into the chapel, the band had some amazing guys. The Chaplain Heredia, he was a nut job. He was anti-Semitic. He was all over the place. He talked about being this Pentecostal apostolic, like screaming at the top of your lungs, spittle flying everywhere, praise Jesus kind of guy. And then in the same breath, he would do some type of underhanded thing to one of the Jews or one of the Muslims. And I didn't really like that. But the chaplain was horrible, but the band was awesome. And I mentioned in a previous episode, a lifer, a Vietnam vet, John Trueblood. He was the band leader. He had been on this compound for almost 45 years. Something that's nearly unheard of. They normally move people every 2 to 4 years. They don't normally have anybody stay anywhere longer than 2 years, though, because they don't want you developing relationships with the officers. But he had been here for 45 years because he had gotten a job assignment where they couldn't transfer him. They had to keep him there. So he'd been the band leader for almost 45 years there too. He had done drums in college, drumline before the Vietnam War. Phenomenal musician, life sentence, wasn't going anywhere. I still stay in touch with him. He calls me his little brother. One of the few people that I told you that I could trust. And that just really earned a special place in my heart. This man showed me so much kindness. When the chaplain threw me off of the band for beating up a child molester, he was in the chaplain's office every single day advocating to have me back on the band. Finally, he's the one that the chaplain wasn't even going to talk to me, but in this particular situation, he got the chaplain to talk to me. And the chaplain tried to give me a whole bunch of things about how it's not Christian and upright to engage in violence. Well, I like to read, and I spent a lot of time reading my Bible because it was getting into the chapel for the band was a great escape from prison. So I was able to turn it around on the chaplain. I quoted to the chaplain that we are supposed to love children and protect children, and children are innocent, and anyone who hurts children hurts God. And he couldn't argue that. He had thrown me out of the chapel and out of the praise and worship band for beating up a guy who had caught HIV when he raped an 18-month-old baby who had been born with it because her parents shared needles. So it's not like I just picked a fight with a random person. When you want to talk about the people who really were there for despicable things, that's about as despicable as you can get, right?
Sure.
So the chaplain let me right back on the band after I had beat up this child molester who had done this horrible thing. Well, my days were every single evening, right? Monday through Saturday. Monday through Saturday, every evening, I was in the chapel. I was up on stage. I was playing guitars. The keyboard player had 30 years as a keyboard player. He was a professional musician on the street. In fact, I have done some gigs with him since I've come home. I've even he's even paid me to come play guitar with him at some of his gigs. Like he's a professional. That's what he went to school for. The bass player had over 45 years of playing bass. He had played on some really big stages. The bass player for Molly Hatchet had been there previous to me. So we're talking about like really, really big guys that have tons of experience. I knew 3 or 4 chords. I knew a handful of chords. So we would be up there playing, and the keyboard player or Trueblood, they would say, Josh, play play a B flat minor 7, and I'd look at them, what? And the keyboard player would play some keys, and he'd be like, this. And I said, great. How do I do that on guitar? And he would say, oh, sorry, I forgot. You go like this, and then you lift this finger, and you lift this finger. And I was like, oh, I know how to do that. And I learned how to play guitar in a band setting. I learned how to play guitar, really. I really only knew a couple of open chords, played like Nirvana by myself. I learned how to play guitar from a bunch of convicted felons in prison in the chapel. Now I have music coming out, which has been recorded with the help of some of the top musicians in the world. The guitar player who does the solo on my original music, I think he's number 76 in the world. He's played with humongous artists all over the place. He's a true maestro. The drummer that I've got has opened for Bon Jovi. Like these musicians are amazing. I learned how to play at a level where these guys talk to me because a bunch of inmates taught me how to play guitar. My style of play, I look like a white guy. I'm a Jew. We don't have rhythm. We don't have soul, right? Well, I learned how to play blues, jazz, and Southern gospel. And they would joke about how, hey, white guys don't have rhythm. Guys, I'm right here. Oh, no, we're not talking about you, Josh. You're our white guy. So I learned how to play gospel, blues, and jazz, right? Guys who pick up the guitar and want to be a rock star, they learn how to play Green Day and Guns N' Roses. Nope. I was learning how to do key changes, and I was playing like women running around with their wigs falling off while like twitching on the floor. That was a style of like really upbeat blues and jazz that I learned how to play. Every bit of my style of playing is influenced by a bunch of prisoners who taught me how to play guitar and taught me how to be a musician. And, you know, everything we've talked about has just been about how horrible this whole experience was. And I got to say that I still stand by that. Okay, prison is horrible. Nobody should ever be locked up. No human being should ever be kept in a cage. Nobody deserves to be abused. Violence shouldn't exist. We all deserve a basic level of decency, right? But all that aside, there were some really positive things that I took away from this. And learning how to play with other musicians, becoming an actual musician myself. Some of the best moments that I can remember in prison were with the band. Now, the bass player had a life sentence. His name was Gene. Sadly, Gene passed away during COVID, and the officers knew that there was people dying, and they didn't do anything about it. And he could still be here today with us, but the officers neglected to do their duty to care for the inmates. But John, the other lifer, he's still here, and I've actually saw him a month and a half ago when I went up to visit the other lifer. I went up to visit the Marine, and True Blood John had a visit at the same time, so he got to meet my daughter and my wife. But I learned how to play. Like this is a huge portion of who I am. That's incredibly positive. Our house is full of music, live music. My daughter asks me every single day, "Daddy, I want to dance. Will you play guitar?" I couldn't have that in my life if it wasn't from Marcus and John. You know, Marcus playing keys and John on the drums, and I wouldn't have that if it wasn't for these guys. So for the last 2.5 years that I was in prison, these guys were my lifeline. Music became my lifeline. D&D was my lifeline until I got the music, and then D&D was a lifeline alongside it. Right? I would do the music. I would go back to the D&D. Now, the guys that did D&D were not usually the same guys that were in the chapel. Guys that did D&D were usually guys that were a little younger. Some of them were into drugs. So sometimes it was interesting, but two of the lifers played D&D. So those were fantastic because those guys knew the value of being able to escape prison and playing D&D with the lifers. It wasn't just playing a game. They made it real.
It was their life.
Yeah, so it made it really real for them because, again, they knew the value of escaping mentally, right? Prison is, they would say, and more than one lifer has said this to me more than once, prison is physical. It only keeps my body here. You can't incarcerate me as long as I can think for myself. And my body can't leave. I can stare at that wall and I can be on the savannah in Africa. I could be in London. I can be whoever, wherever I want, whenever I want in here.
And Dungeons and Dragons allowed for that for hours at a time with others rather than
just yourself. That's right. Dungeons and Dragons allowed you to share that freedom with other people and make it better because you might have a good imagination and I have a good imagination. But if the two of us put our imaginations together, I'm going to fill out and enrich things that your imagination would never have formulated. And you're going to do the same for me because you and I see the world a little different and we have different life experiences. We've read different books. We've watched different shows. And so your imagination is a little different than mine. But if you put them together, instead of having a two-dimensional story, you end up with a really vivid and rich three-dimensional environment that you can not only visualize, you can smell it, you can taste it, you can feel it. And the lifers, again, the lifers had been down a long time. They not only knew the value of being able to escape prison, they knew that the value to keep their peace and safety, of being able to share that with other people. Because if other people could get tastes of that and it could bring a little bit of peace and calm or even some joy to some guys, overall, everybody will be kinder and nicer to each other. And so that was what I saw here. There was these guys, and you would really, really be surprised at some of these guys. I mean, an old heavyset black guy, a cue ball looking like Megamind, white Marine Corps veteran. You'd think he'd be a white supremacist. Both of these guys are guys with life sentences. Neither one of them were violent. They both kept to themselves. They were real quiet. All of the officers were respectful and polite. They didn't bother them. And you'd wonder, like, why are these guys always so calm? Why do they always have a smile on their face? They're in prison. They're never going home. How can they be smiling with everybody? How can they always have a positive outlook? Well, that's because they found a way not only to not be in prison, but to get other people out with them so they could share that. And I was privileged enough to have had them include me. I found a way for myself to escape, but they were the ones that allowed me to participate in it with them. So music has become my life now, my home, my family. It was a defining factor with my wife and I when we started dating. The people that I've surrounded myself with, Aldo, who you can hear on my music, he's a world-class rock star. I mean, they sell out at Revolution Live. They sell out. The whole place is packed. Like you can't get in. Lines around the block. Real deal rock stars. These guys, I would never have met these people. I would never have talked to them. He's one of my best friends. Bonnie and I are married. We didn't have a wedding because of COVID. We've got a wedding coming up. But this world-class musician is going to be standing next to me as one of my groomsmen because these inmates in prison, these horrible scumbags that, everybody's forgotten about, they took time out of their life to treat me like I was part of their family as an equal, to share their knowledge with me. They were patient. They taught me how to play guitar. They taught me music theory. They taught me how to survive when things still kept getting darker, because the closer you get to getting home, the farther that tunnel gets away. Just like a horror movie where you see a doorway at the end of a hallway, and as you start walking,
take the door.
As you start walking towards that doorway, it gets further away from you faster than you can get towards it. Well, that's what your last year in prison feels like. You can see it. And the closer you get to it, the farther away it gets. That's what it feels like. And these guys made sure that I came home. These guys made sure I had the lifeline of music and D&D, but they also showed me love and kindness, which had I come home with that same cold-blooded mentality that enabled me to survive the murders and other things that I witnessed, I would never have been able to adapt to being home. But these guys made sure that I had a transition to humanity because of D&D.
The book is Privilege Lost. The podcast is Losing Privilege. And I don't know if you realize it or not, but just a few moments ago, you said you actually found privilege in prison.
I did. I found privilege because other people saw something in me and granted it to me. They gave me an opportunity to share in that privilege.
Losing privilege. Josh, sometimes you can find it in the most unusual places.
Absolutely.
We'll see you on the next episode.
Next time.
Losing Privilege is a 12-part podcast series telling the fascinating story of Joshua Elishev and his roller coaster life of success and deception, love and loss, and the determination to survive prison and build a life after nearly losing his own. Visit JoshuaElishev.com. That's Joshua, ELYASHIV.com for details on his book, Privilege Lost, his music, and upcoming projects. And listen and watch all 12 episodes of his podcast, Losing Privilege.